It isn't mind reading, said Colleen, and we aren't all connected into one big mass mind. However, before we come into the world, the Sylvari are united in the dream of dreams. The three of them sat at the end of a table large enough for a platoon. Dougal had slept at least 6 hours in the most comfortable bed in all of Lion's Arch, and had been roused only unwillingly by Colleen saying that Riona was back and dinner was in half hour. It was already dark, and a heavy moon shone through the tall windows. Dinner was excellent, a rare treat for Dougal. He had spent many of his years on the road, able only to eat what he was willing to carry with him. As a result, he had survived on mostly water and hard tack, and the occasional bit of small game he brought down. Tonight, though, Soulkeeper had made sure that he, Riona, and Colleen had the finest food and drink available in Lion's Arch. They dined on succulent roast mutton, braised moa, fresh breads, and a selection of the finest fruits available from the city's busy harbour market. They also split a pair of bottles of wine that was older than anyone at the table, and finer than any Dougal had ever tasted. It was not the last meal Dougal had enjoyed before heading off on a job from which he had no assurance he would ever return. He hoped it would not be the final one, despite his misgivings, and was determined to make the most of it either way. Riona had set Colleen off by asking the question, "You're 5 years old. How do you know so much?" Indeed, it was a question that plagued Dougal as well. Unlike Riona, he had known a number of Sylvari, and they always surprised him with the depth and breadth of their knowledge. By the same token, there were matters that were completely beyond them. Emotions seemed to be a hard concept for them to understand fully, as was tact. The Sylvari he had dealt with over the years would often unknowingly offend others by pointing out obvious and uncomfortable truths. "We are the bounty of the pale tree, which grows at the centre of the grove," said Colleen. "Long ago, there was a human warrior named Ronan who found the seed of the pale tree in a cavern. Ronan, tired of war and, along with a former foe, a centaur named Ventari, travelled to the south and planted the tree in what would become the grove. Ronan passed on, and so too, in time, did Ventari, who spent his life tending to the young sapling. Before he died, Ventari carved his tablet and set it down at the base of the tree. When we awakened, that tablet became our law, and we were infused with the spirit of both brave Ronan and gentle Ventari. We were not there when this all happened, but we know it because of the dream of dreams. While we were quickening within the golden fruit of the pale tree, the tree spoke to us of the world outside. She taught us, if you will, of the nature of the waking world. We are not all-knowing," she continued. "The dream of dreams is not like a tome of all knowledge, but it does give us a life before our life, in which we learn much of the world we are coming into. Fire is hot. Wild animals can be dangerous, but many can be tamed. Here is the proper way to use a sword. This is how you cast a spell if you are so disposed. We come into the world with knowledge of the world, but not necessarily the experience." Riona shook her head. "Is there a difference? Experience gives you knowledge." "For humans, most likely," said Colleen, "but not for us." She picked up an oversized drumstick. "This is the leg of a young moa. I know that it was a moa from the dream, and further that it is well cooked but not overcooked. I know what it tastes like, but have never tasted it myself." She took a bite of the leg and chewed for a moment or two. "Chicken," she said at last, the word muffled by the food in her cheek. "I don't know what's weirder," said Riona, looking a little uneasy. "Your telepathic dreams, or the fact I am watching a plant eat an animal?" "Many plants eat animals," countered Colleen. "Fly traps, ibogas, jacarandas, pitcher plants. The oakhards chase down and mash animals they encounter and use the remains to fertilize their young." "Of course they do," said Riona. She turned to Dougal and whispered loudly, "Creepy." If Colleen heard the comment, she did not respond to it. "But we don't have telepathic dreams. In the dream of dreams, one grows one's identity. When one is awakened into the world, we leave the dream behind, for the most part. But what we learn in the world goes back into the dream to help new Sylvari understand. The firstborn, entered into a world without Sylvari, but what they learned helped all that followed them. So too, what I learn will help future generations. Must make it hard for Sylvari to keep secrets, said Riona, and Dougal realised what she was thinking. Colleen knew everything they knew about the mission. Who else has emerged, newly fallen from the pale tree, who knew about this? We try not to keep secrets, said Colleen, almost smugly. But knowledge is rarely specific. A face, an item, perhaps a name may stay with us once we awaken. We may feel drawn to a particular place or person, or feel that some task needs to be done. Occasionally, something in the dream echoes back to an awakened Sylvari, but it is more of a feeling than a vision filled with details and specifics. That is one reason so many Sylvari wish to fight the Elder Dragons. We dream of a great shadow in the dream, and awaken to a world where the dragons cast an equally deep shadow on the land. As an example, she motioned at Dougal with her mower bird. I know about the long war between the Char and the humans, but not much about the reasons why, or what happened in Ascalon City. She looked at Dougal and took another big bite of mower flesh to indicate she was done talking for a while. Riona took another slug from her wine glass, then reached for the bottle again. Give her the abridged version, please. Dougal wiped his mouth on his napkin, sat back in his chair, and began. As General Soulkeeper said, the Char were here on Tyria first, and ran wild over the entire continent. When humans arrived, they were the first serious challenge to Char supremacy in centuries. But if it hadn't been for the death of the Khan-Er, humanity might not have survived those ancient days. The Khan-Er's children, who were also his 4 imperators, leaders of their own personal legions, fell to squabbling over his mantle, each accusing the others of treachery. They set their legions against each other. Blood, iron, flame, and ash. None of them was strong enough to defeat the other 3, though, and in the course of the civil war, the claw of the Khan-Er was lost. Yet, their internal dissension gave humanity some breathing room to develop, and with that time, we conquered Ascalon. Several generations later, when the Char got their act together, we fought to keep them out of what we now considered our land. To that end, the kings of Ascalon began building a massive wall that ran west from the Shiver Peaks all the way to the Blaze Ridge Mountains on the eastern frontier. It took 900 years to complete, but it kept the Char to the north of it, where they belonged. Indeed, backed by the strength of the wall, we pushed them even further north, so that for most Ascalonians, the Char were a distant, but always present threat. The northern walls stood unbreached for nearly 200 years, but way back in 1070, the Char discovered a great magic, based on mighty cauldrons filled with mystical energy. The Char shamans, particularly those that commanded the Flame Legion, unlocked the secrets of the cauldrons and brought about the searing. Great burning crystals fell from the sky and scourged the lands around them, breaking the Great Northern Wall. The Char flowed through the wall in an unstoppable wave that washed away all the way through Ascalon until it crashed on the shores of Or. In Or, the most powerful vizier cast a forbidden spell of his own that stopped the Char cold, but only at the sacrifice of his entire nation, sinking Or beneath the sea. But that, as they say, is another story. The searing forced King Adalbern to move his throne from Rin to Ascalon City, the only major city in his nation that still stood. There, he felt, he would make his last stand against the Char invasion. The king's sole heir, Prince Rurik, disagreed with him and led a large portion of his people over the Shiver Peaks to safety in Kryta rather than wait for their doom with their king. Prince Rurik, by the way, never made it to Kryta with his followers. He gave his own life so that they might find their freedom. It's said that Prince Rurik's death hurt King Adalbern worse than the fall of Rin itself. Back in Ascalon City, the Flame Legion prepared for a final assault on the place's walls. The Imperator of the Flame Legion somehow got his hands on the claw. So, this Flame Legion Imperator really was the last Khan-Er? Asked Colleen. Dougal clicked his tongue at that. Not quite. The claw is a powerful weapon, legends say, a force that would allow one to unite the legions under a single banner. But you still have to convince the other legions and earn the title of Khan-Ur to seal the deal, as it were. The Flame Imperator decided that conquering Ascalon City and beheading King Adalbern with the Claw would cement his claim, so that's what he set out to do. The legions, led by the shamans of the Flame Legion, assaulted the walls of Ascalon City with their forces, their tamed siege devourers, and their magical cauldrons. The Char armies overran the defenders and surrounded the walls. Adalbern fought until the last, armed with his great magical sword Magdaea. Magdaea was an artifact from ancient Ara, the city of the gods, and infused with power. It's said that Magdaea's twin, Sahothin, was in the hands of his son Rurik when he died. In any event, Adalbern single-handedly brought down wave upon wave of Char warbands, making his last great stand on the battlements of his own tower. At last, King Adalbern faced the Flame Legion Imperator, the leader of the Char forces, who himself bore the claw of the Khan-Ur. When the two weapons met, the energies within both exploded in a great jet of power that was seen from the Shiver Peaks themselves. "The foe fire," said Colleen. Dougal fell silent then, picturing that terrible event in his mind, making it match up with the horrible images he'd witnessed on his own venture into the harrowed city. "Tell me more about the foe fire," Colleen said. "As a necromancer, that fascinates me." A gruff voice, Dougal recognised it as Doomforge's, spoke from the darkness of the hallway. Dougal wondered how long the Char had been there, and what she had heard. "The foe fire destroyed every Char within Ascalon City, and for leagues around as well. The buildings, the farms, and the land were unharmed, but every Char within reach was destroyed. The humans, however, suffered a different fate. Their souls were peeled loose from their shredded bodies, and they survive eternally as guardian ghosts to jealously protect the land. Adalbern, whom we call the Sorcerer King, damned his people to destroy the Char. Adalbern did with accursed magic what his army had not been able to manage in years, and he cheated the Char of our triumph." Doomforge stood in the room's arch entrance and waited for someone to gainsay her. Dougal resisted the temptation, and neither Riona nor Colleen seemed inclined to take the bait. Doomforge grunted at the lack of any challenge. "General Soulkeeper sends me with her regrets. She cannot join us tonight." "Us?" Dougal said. Doomforge moved into the room and cast her eye over the ruins of the mill. She had taken off her armour, and now wore just a simple rope and leather clothes that Dougal could only describe as a harness. Dougal supposed that with all her fur she didn't need clothes for warmth, only Char standards of modesty. It covered just enough of her to manage that, although on a human it would have been considered scandalous. Despite her casual attire, she seemed far less relaxed than she had been in her armour. "Soulkeeper asked me to dine with you, so that we might become better acquainted." She looked down at the table. "But I see you are nearly finished." Dougal waited for the Char to turn around and leave. He enjoyed watching her try to decide how long she would have to endure their company to fulfill her orders. Despite her actions against the Norn, he wasn't about to make her feel at home. Colleen, on the other hand, had no trouble with that at all. She leapt to her feet and scurried over to take the Char by the paw and escort her to a seat at the table. "The General is as wise as she is generous," she said. "I'm thrilled to have someone like you as a part of our guild." Dougal winced at that word, and saw Doomforge do the same as she accepted the seat the much smaller Sylvari shoved in behind her. "I have a warband already," the Char said. "I do not need a guild." Dougal nodded at that, finally finding something he and Doomforge could agree upon. "We are in no way a guild," he said. "Guilds are permanent organizations. They're created and maintained by their own membership and are usually set up with long-term goals. We are a team, a company, maybe even what the Asura call a crew, and I don't even like teams that much." Riona failed to suppress a rude snort at that, but he ignored her. "It's often better to work alone." Colleen smiled at them both as if they were slow-headed children. "But you're not working alone, are you? And you," she turned back to Doomforge, "don't have your warband with you. I suppose, in a way, we're your warband." Dougal almost choked on his wine at this, but Doomforge's reaction drowned out his own. I am a Char, she said, pronouncing each word carefully. My warband is to me what humans would consider a family. We were raised together as cubs in the creche, in the Farah. We were trained to fight together as a unit. We may not share blood, for we honour our elders and forebears, but the bonds of battle hold stronger than any family tie. A family? Colleen said, tilting her head at a curious angle. All Silvari are a single family. We all sprang from the same source, the Pale Tree. But the dream, our communal history and subconscious, binds us together even more than that. Perhaps that is why we treasure our individualism. When you have so much in common, the new experiences you have, those that separate you from the others, are what make you unique. A servant swept in with a roast suckling pig on a platter and placed it before the Char. Doomforge eyed it for a long moment, then set to picking at it with a single talon, slicing the flesh from the bones like a master butcher. By that, the Char said, I mean that I already have a family, or a guild, or a warband, or whatever you wish to call it. I have no need for another. You can always use another family, said Colleen. Having dismembered the pig, Doomforge stuffed it into her mouth. Piece by piece, its pink flesh disappeared into her maw. The way Doomforge's jaws and teeth worked in concert to annihilate the pig fascinated Dougal. He could not look away, no matter how much Doomforge glared at him over the bones she picked clean. All right, said Colleen. Not a family. We can at least be a team. Doomforge scowled as she reached for a goblet of ale a servant had brought her while she consumed her meal. You forget that I am to enter Ebonhawk not as a friend, but as a prisoner. The Char looked as though she wished she could hack up that last word, spit it on the floor, and grind it under her boot. This is not a wandering adventure. It is not a battle in some arena, for the sake of glory and recognition. It is a mission. I neither want nor need friends, nor a family, nor a team. I need only to follow my orders, and this I will do. I see, said Dougal. And have you spent enough time with us to have fulfilled your orders? No, said the Char, and for a moment Dougal swore. Doomforge's features softened for a moment. There is another matter. I came to apologise as well. To you, Dougal Keene. Dougal's eyebrows rose, but the Char just took a deep breath and pressed on. Doomforge stared at the table as she spoke. I acted rashly in the General's presence, and I am to convey to you my apologies for doing so. As long as you do not provoke me, it will not happen again. Further, Doomforge's brows furrowed. To allow a Norn, even one as notorious as Gullick Odson, to slip past our guards is inexcusable. He apparently scaled the building and broke in through a window in broad daylight. Were he more competent or less inebriated, he would have succeeded, and our mission would have become doubly impossible. I have spoken with the guards and it will not happen again. Odson has been sobered up, and I understand that he is facing General Soulkeeper's wrath as we speak. Dougal waved off her apology. They were not going to be here long enough for any security changes to matter. All I care about, Doomforge, is getting on our way before something like this happens again. Doomforge reached for a glass but did not pick it up. Ember. Excuse me? Call me Ember. Seriously? Said Dougal, trying not to smile at the uncomfortable Char. He tried to remember when he had ever been on a first-name basis with a Char, and came up empty. The General suggested I request it. Are we supposed to be friends, then? Not at all, she said, and Dougal was certain that the Char smiled as she said it. Dougal nodded. Then call me Dougal. I only have one name, Colleen put in with a helpful smile. Riona scowled. Call me Crusader, Char, and I will call you the same, out of respect for our order. But it is good to see you kids playing nice. Just as long as we make it through Ebonhawk, said Dougal. To Ember Doomforge, he said, I've been trying to come up with a better plan, but short of a potion of invisibility, I'm at a loss. Colleen put a hand on Ember's free paw. Are you going to be all right about wearing the chains? Ember bared her teeth for a moment before she spoke. I hate it. I hate the very idea of it. But the General is correct that there is no other way, so I will do it. It's just a ruse, said Colleen. It doesn't mean anything. If you believe that, Ember snarled, then you know nothing of the Char. Dougal tossed back another gulp of the liquor. It's about Scorch Razor, isn't it? Ember started at the mention of the name. She cast Dougal an angry look, then nodded. Scorch Razor? Said Colleen. Carla Scorch Razor, said Dougal. Even the humans in Ebonhawk know about her, one of the most famous Chars since the time of the Searing. Back in the day, when the shamans of the Flame Legion commanded the Char armies, female Char didn't have much status among their people. They never went to war and were relegated to subordinate positions. Many of them served in chains. Scorch Razor changed all of that. She destroyed the Char shamans and nearly took down an entire legion of them. How typically human, Ember said, blathering on about things you know very little about. Your race has just enough knowledge to be dangerous. All right, Dougal said, his own curiosity rising. Enlighten us. Ember pulled a tuft of fur from her arm and held it over a candle flickering in the centre of the table. The hair ignited, and Ember dropped it into her glass. The liquor in it burst into a bluish flame. Lit by the flame in her glass, Ember spoke, her voice no longer carrying its usual menace. In the days when humans still presented a challenge for the Char, we did something terribly foolish that we have long since sworn never to do again. We worshipped gods. Before humans came to Tyria, we had no gods. We knew about creatures with power we could barely comprehend, but we thought of them as foes, to be defeated, not gods to be placated. When we suffered our first defeats at the hairless hands of humans, though, many Char blamed this on the fact that they could plead to their gods for help, while we fought alone, relying only on ourselves. A warband from the Flame Legion came to the rest of the Char one day and announced that they had found gods for us to worship. These were creatures later called Titans, but they were powerful enough that such labels mattered little. The shamans who led their worship used braziers of fire as icons of their newfound gods. The other legions hesitated to follow their lead, but the Flame Legion had so much success at converting others, often by force, that many assumed that they must have the gods on their side. It was the Titans that gave us the cauldrons that allowed us to breach the Great Northern Wall. One famous Char stood against them, Bathia Havoc-bringer of the Blood Legion. She sniffed out the foul plans of the Flame Legion and their new shamans who directed the worship of their gods in ways that brought themselves power and profit. She said, I will bow before no one and nothing, be it mortal or god, and she persuaded many other Char to follow her lead. Because of this, the shamans gathered in the night to plot against her. They captured her and made a blood sacrifice of her to their new gods. They declared her a traitor and accused her of using her sexuality to tempt the males from the true path of the gods. To prevent any more such treachery, they marked all females with the same brand of deceit and banned them from serving in the legions, where they would mix with the males. Many females objected to this, as did some males. Several shared Havoc-bringer's fate, and eventually the others saw no choice but to submit themselves to their new gods' will. We lived like this for centuries, long enough that most of us could not remember there ever having been another way. Ember put her paw over her glass of lit liquor. The flames had burned low, and her paw sealing off the glass from the surrounding air soon snuffed them out entirely. If the heat from the fire hurt her, she did not show it. After the searing, some Char realized that the shamans of the Flame Legion, who had long abused their powers, had tricked us. A warrior named Pyre Fierceshot helped spur the rest of us to stand up to the Flame Legion, but we did not triumph until his granddaughter, Carla Scorch Razor, led a rebellion that restored female Char to their rightful place. How did she manage that? Asked Colleen. Ember chuckled at this. Males who think females are beneath them are poor at keeping secrets from them. The females watched the shamans and learned that they were cheating the Char of their right to chart their own destiny. Armed with that knowledge, they spread it far and wide throughout the Char lands, until most Char females, and many of their chosen males, sided with Scorch Razor. Before Scorch Razor entered the rebellion, plenty of other Char had already lined up to be counted against the shamans of the Flame Legion, following in the tracks of Pyre Fierceshot. As their numbers grew, so did the ferocity with which the shamans tried to keep them down. With Scorchrazor's help, though, the rebels finally had a chance at winning. Scorchrazor pointed out that the shamans of the Flame Legion lacked one thing the rebels had: open minds. If the rebels could see their way fit to allowing the females to fight beside them, they could effectively double their numbers overnight. This would give them the soldiers they needed to be able to overwhelm the shamans and their magic, and, eventually, the human kingdoms as well. Having grown up with their females in servitude to them for centuries, though, many of the male Char were reluctant to go against this tradition. They argued that the females had stayed at home for too long and were no longer suited for the battlefield, if they had ever been. To counter this argument, Scorchrazor threw down a challenge before her detractors. The most important of these was Forge Ironstrike, Imperator of the Iron Legion, and he agreed to meet her in single combat. If she could defeat him, he would acknowledge that female Char were just as qualified to become soldiers as the males. Otherwise, he would kill her, as an example to the other females who were confused about their places. The battle took place in the ruins of Rin, the old human capital of Ascalon, which we have now restored as the Black Citadel. The Imperators of the Blood and Ash Legion stood as seconds. Blood backed its daughter, Scorchrazor, while Ash sided with Iron. Scores of others watched, from the highest tribune all the way down to the lowest gladium. Ember knocked back a bit more of her drink, thought for a moment, and then spoke. She was warming to both the spirits and to her tale. Scores of Char came to watch the battle in the ruined arena in Rin. The two warriors were well matched. As a male of our race, Ironstrike was the larger and stronger of the two, but Scorchrazor was by far the faster and more skilled. Time after time, Ironstrike charged, his claws stretching for Scorchrazor's throat, but each time she dodged him and sliced him with her own claws as he passed her by. Eventually, the frustration and the loss of blood took its toll, and Ironstrike grew tired. Then Scorchrazor switched to the attack. She drove the battered Ironstrike back until he ran out of room to retreat. He summoned the last of his strength for one last charge, but she dodged that too, and knocked him flat. She pounced on him as he sprawled on the arena's dusty floor and forced his surrender from him. Released, Ironstrike honored the terms of their deal. He acknowledged her right to battle alongside him, and he welcomed the rest of the female Char to join their rebellion. Even the shamans from the Iron, Blood, and Ash Legions rallied to their cause. The forces of the Flame Legion and its shamans met those arrayed against them in a final battle on the plains of Golkine. Because the Flame Legion had told their females to stay home where they belonged, they were so outnumbered that they surrendered rather than be slaughtered. To her credit, Scorchrazor accepted the surrender, but only so that the Char would not be stripped of the power of the Flame Legion, which had more shamans than all the other legions combined, even without gods behind it, perhaps especially magic as its uses. The Imperator of the Flame Legion was so shamed by his surrender that when he finally met Scorchrazor, he stabbed her with a poisoned dagger. Char may do anything to win a battle, but only the worst cowards would violate a surrender so. His treachery cost Scorchrazor her life, but her last words were, "At least I die knowing my sisters are free." Which is why you had such a strong reaction against wearing chains, said Riona. Ember pressed her lips together so hard they paled. Then she polished off the rest of the liquor in her glass in a single swallow. "What happened to the assassin?" asked Colleen, her hands still covering her mouth in disbelief. "Did he get away with it?" Ember shook her head. Imperator Ironstrike himself throated the coward on the spot. The Flame Legion Imperator went to his reward before Scorchrazor did. "And tomorrow," said Dougal, "we're off to find the weapon that an early Flame Legion Imperator dropped during the Foe Fire, years before that." Ember nodded. "We seek the Claw to bring peace between your people and mine. For the sake of my people, I will wear your chains, but I will think of Carla Scorchrazor every moment they restrain me." She rallied for a moment, and her face grew sharp and feral once more. "My orders are to complete this mission by any means necessary, and I will do just that. Know, however, that if any of you get in my way, if you become more than a hindrance than a help, I will not hesitate to strike you down on the spot and leave you to die." With that, she spun on her heel and left. Riona rolled her eyes, then slumped in her chair with a hand on her forehead. Dougal reached again for the wine. Colleen smiled with delight as servants brought in chilled custard for their dessert. The Sylvari raised her glass of wine. An inspirational beginning. We may not be a guild, or a warband, or a crew, or even a family, but we are a company. Adventurers gathered together to a single purpose. For the moment, that is enough. I drink to our success.